Wyoming, 1881. The Callaway auction was the talk of Harlan County for 2 weeks before it happened, and for considerably longer after. Not because of the cattle. The cattle were fine, 140 head of good shorthorn stock that went for fair prices to men who knew what they were buying. Not because of the land, though the land was the kind that makes ranchers quiet with want, 320 acres of creek-bottom grass at the foot of the Wind River Range, the sort that stays green 2 weeks longer than everything around it in August. People talked because of Rose Callaway. She stood on the porch of the house her husband had built and watched strangers walk through every room of it. She stood straight. She did not cry. She was 27 years old and had been a widow for 6 weeks, and she stood on that porch in a dark gray dress that had been let out and taken in and let out again over the years until it fit her now the way worn things fit, perfectly and without asking. Her hair was the color of winter wheat, braided and pinned at the back of her neck. Her eyes were the particular blue that Wyoming sky turns in October, just before the cold comes in for good. She watched them carry out her husband's desk, and she did not look away. That was the thing people talked about afterward. Not her composure exactly. Something else. The quality of her stillness. The way she received everything that was happening, the way good land receives a hard season. Taking it, not pretending it away. Harlan Briggs stood at the back of the crowd with his hat in his hands and watched her the whole time. He was 46 years old and owned the second largest spread in the county, and had not watched a woman with any particular attention since his wife Ada had died 4 years ago. He was watching now, and he couldn't entirely account for it, which bothered him in a mild, background way, the way a loose hinge bothers a man who notices such things. He did not approach her that day. He drove home with his hat on the seat beside him and his hands on the reins and the image of a woman standing straight on a porch in a gray dress, doing what needed doing without flinching. He thought about her for 3 days without intending to. The practical facts of Rose Callaway's situation were these. Daniel Callaway had died of a heart that quit without warning one morning in August, while he was mending the south fence. Rose had found him herself. The doctor said he'd been gone before he fell. She chose to believe this because the alternative was worse, and because Daniel had been a man who would have wanted a quick end, not a slow one. The bank held the note on the land. Daniel had borrowed against it 2 years prior, when the herd got sick and the season turned bad, the kind of borrowing that makes sense in a crisis and becomes a different kind of crisis once the dust settles. Rose had known about it. She had not known how much. The amount the bank produced at the reading of the will was more than she had words for. There was no argument. There was no legal remedy. There was the auction, and after the auction there was $212, which was what remained after the bank took what it was owed, and there was her sister-in-law's house in Laramie, where Eleanor Callaway had lived alone since her own husband left for California 4 years ago and had not written since. Eleanor had written immediately when she heard. "Come stay. There's a room. It's not much, but it's ours." $212 and a room in Laramie. Rose folded Eleanor's letter and put it in her dress pocket and went to stand at the kitchen window of the house she was about to stop owning and looked at the Wind River Range doing what it always did, which was hold the sky up and not particularly care about anything below it. She had 6 weeks. The second time Harlan Briggs saw Rose Callaway, she was in the dry goods store in Harlan on a Thursday morning, buying provisions with the focused economy of someone who has done the arithmetic and knows exactly what she can spend. He came in for nails. She was at the counter with a short list and the careful posture of a woman who does not want to be watched and is being watched anyway. Martha Greer, behind the counter, was giving her the particular brand of sympathy that small towns give to misfortune, warm and genuine and entirely without useful application. "Such a tragedy," Martha was saying. "Daniel was such a good man. We all said so, and now you all alone out there with the place being sold and everything, it's just—" "I'm managing," Rose said, quietly, plainly. "The way you say a thing when you've said it many times and have stopped expecting it to end the conversation." Of course you are. Of course. But just... Oh, Mrs. Greer, Rose said, I need 2 pounds of flour and a tin of coffee. If you have dried beans, I'll take a sack of those as well. Harlan set his nails on the counter and said nothing. He was 2 feet away. She knew he was there. He'd seen her register him when he came in, that quick peripheral awareness, but she hadn't looked at him directly. He looked at her list on the counter. Small, careful, 2 pounds of flour, a tin of coffee. The provisions of a woman making $212 last as long as possible. Martha went to get the beans. Harlan picked up his nails. Mrs. Calloway, he said. She turned. Her eyes were very direct. The kind of eyes that don't waste time finding out what they're looking at. Mr. Briggs, she said. She knew his name. In a county this size, everyone knew everyone's name. I expect you're here about the Harlan auction land. It wasn't an accusation. Just a statement of the most likely reason a man like him would be in a dry goods store in the middle of a Thursday morning. Nails, he said, and held up the small paper packet. Something moved across her face. Not quite a smile, the edge of one, maybe. Well, she said. That's more practical. Martha came back with the beans, and the transaction concluded, and Rose Calloway put her provisions in her basket and left. Harlan stood at the counter and heard the door close behind her and thought about eyes that were the color of the October sky and the edge of something that wasn't quite a smile. He bought the nails. He drove home. He came back to town the following Thursday. It became a pattern before either of them acknowledged it was a pattern. Thursdays. The dry goods store, or the post office, or once the feed store where she came to settle a small outstanding account Daniel had left, and where Harlan happened to be discussing winter hay prices with Tom Aldridge and happened to finish that conversation about 30 seconds after she arrived. They talked about practical things, the weather, which in Wyoming in September was a serious subject, the price of cattle, whether the winter coming would be early or late. She had opinions, offered without apology, and they were usually correct, which he noticed and respected. He didn't push. He was not by nature a pusher. He said what he had to say and let it land. After the 4th Thursday, she said, not looking at him, while examining a bolt of dark wool fabric that she could probably not afford, and was examining anyway, "You don't have to find reasons to be in town, Mr. Briggs." He was quiet for a moment. I know, he said. She set down the fabric, looked at him. Then why do you... He turned his hat in his hands. He had a habit of doing this when he was thinking through something carefully, and he was thinking through this very carefully. Because you're managing alone, he said, and you shouldn't have to. Her chin came up slightly. I'm doing fine. I didn't say you weren't. A silence. She looked at him with those October eyes, and he looked back, steadily, the way he looked at everything he was serious about. I'm not looking for rescue, Mr. Briggs, she said. I know that too, he said. I'm not offering any. Another silence, longer. Martha Greer was visible at the far end of the store, pretending to arrange tins with tremendous concentration. Then what are you offering? Rose asked. He thought about it honestly, because that was the only way he thought about things. Company, he said. On Thursdays. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she went back to examining the wool fabric with the expression of a woman who has filed something away and will return to it in her own time. She was in town the following Thursday, so was he. Before we go further, I want to stop for just a moment and ask, where in the world are you listening to this story from tonight? From Wyoming to Wales, from Texas to Tasmania, these voices travel farther than I ever imagined when I started writing them. Drop your country in the comments. It means more than you know. Now, let's go back to Rose, because October is coming, and with it, the kind of cold that makes a person reckon with things they've been putting off. October came hard and fast, the way it sometimes does in Wyoming, skipping the gentle part of autumn and going straight to something serious. The aspens went yellow, and then the yellow was gone in a week of wind, and the mornings started carrying ice in them before the month was half done. Rose had 8 weeks left on the property. She knew the number precisely because she had counted backward from the date the bank had given her, the way you count the days of something you don't want to end and can't prevent ending. She was sleeping in the house she no longer owned, cooking on the stove she no longer owned, walking the fence lines in the mornings out of a habit that had no longer any practical purpose. She walked them anyway. Harlan came on a Tuesday, not a Thursday. She was at the south fence when she heard the horse, and turned, and it was him, and she registered the day-of-week discrepancy without saying anything about it. He dismounted, came to the fence, rested his forearms on the top rail the way men rest on fences when they have something to say and aren't quite ready to say it. They stood there a moment looking at the land together. The creek was still running. The grass had gone the silver brown of late autumn. The mountains had their first real snow on the high peaks. "This is good land," he said finally. "I know," she said. "Daniel did well with it." "He did." She paused. "The bank did better." He was quiet. Then, "Eleanor Calloway's house in Laramie. You've written to her?" She looked at him sideways. "Small town." "Yes." "And you're going?" It wasn't quite a question. She answered it anyway. "At the end of November. It's the sensible thing." He turned his hat in his hands. She'd noticed he did this. She'd started watching for it, which was its own kind of information. "Rose," he said. She'd been Mrs. Calloway for 4 Thursdays and 2 Tuesdays. Her name in his mouth, said plainly, without performance, landed differently than she'd expected. "I have a housekeeper," he said. "Mrs. Dowd. She's been with me since Ada died. She manages the house and I manage the land, and the arrangement works." He paused. "But she's going to her daughter in Cheyenne in December, and she's not coming back." Rose waited. "I'm not good at the house," he said. "I'm not asking for rescue either. To be clear, I'm asking if you'd consider staying in the county." He looked at the mountains. "The foreman's cottage on my land has been empty for 2 years. It's weather-tight, 2 rooms, small, but it's private." He turned the hat again. "I pay fair wages. The work is the same work you've been doing here, but it's for a household that still belongs to the person living in it." She was very still. The wind came off the mountains and moved through the dried grass with a sound like breathing. "That's a complicated offer," she said. "I know. People will talk." "People talked when you stood on that porch at the auction," he said. "Didn't seem to slow you down." She looked at him for a long moment. "Why?" she said. "Truly, why?" He held her gaze. "Because a lady like you shouldn't be alone," he said. "In a city she doesn't know, in a room in someone else's house, getting smaller by the week." A pause. "And because I've been driving to town on Thursdays for reasons that stopped being about nails a month ago, and I'd rather be honest about that than pretend otherwise." The creek moved. The mountains held the last of the afternoon light on their white peaks. A hawk crossed the sky above them, unhurried. She looked at him for a long time. Then she said, very quietly, the way a person says something they've thought about and decided, "I'm not alone if you're here." He went still. She looked away, back at the mountains, her jaw set slightly the way it set when she was embarrassed by her own honesty and was deciding not to take it back. "That was a foolish thing to say," she said. "No," he said. "It wasn't." She did not say yes that day. She thought about it the way she thought about everything consequential, all the way around, looking at it from every angle, testing the weight of it before she committed to carrying it. She thought about Eleanor's house in Laramie, the room that was not much but ours. Eleanor was a good woman, generous, and Rose loved her, but she had seen the inside of that room in her mind's eye every day for 6 weeks, and each time it looked slightly smaller. She thought about Harlan Briggs, 46 years old, steady and deliberate, a man who drove to town on Thursdays for nails that he didn't always need. A man who said what he meant and meant what he said, and didn't dress either up with more words than the thing required. She thought about Ada Briggs, who had died of a fever, and who, by every account Rose had ever heard, had been a deeply loved woman. There was something in how a man treated a dead wife's memory that told you things about him. Harlan never spoke ill of her, never erased her from the story of his life, never used her either as a reason to close himself off from the living. He simply carried her the way you carry something that mattered, with care and without theater. She thought about the foreman's cottage, 2 rooms, weather-tight, hers. She wrote to Eleanor on a Thursday night. She wrote honestly, because Eleanor deserved honesty, and because Rose was too tired for anything else. She explained the situation, the offer, the wages, the cottage, and she wrote something that surprised her when she saw it on the page. "I think I want to stay." 3 words. She looked at them for a while. Then she folded the letter and addressed it to Laramie. The trouble came from a direction no one was watching, which is usually where trouble comes from. His name was Preston Cole, and he was Daniel Calloway's second cousin, a fact that Daniel had rarely mentioned and which had not seemed relevant until now. He arrived in Harlan in the 3rd week of October in a good coat and bad intentions, and he went to see a lawyer before he went anywhere else, which told you most of what you needed to know about the nature of his visit. His argument, delivered to Rose on a Thursday morning through the lawyer, was this. Daniel had borrowed money from Preston Cole in 1878, a private arrangement, undocumented, before the bank loan, and that amount plus 3 years of interest constituted a debt against the estate, payable to him now. Rose looked at the lawyer's letter. She looked at it for a long time. She had no memory of Daniel mentioning any such loan. That proved nothing. Daniel had kept certain financial troubles close, not out of deception but out of shame, the particular shame of a proud man who found himself needing help. She could not say it wasn't true. She could not say it was. What she could say was that the number at the bottom of the letter, with interest compounded, was $168. She had $212. She was sitting at the kitchen table with the letter when she heard hooves in the yard. She knew before she got up that it would be Harlan. Something had shifted in the last few weeks, and she could distinguish the sound of his horse from others without knowing she'd learned to. And she was right. He came to the door, saw her face. "What happened?" he said. Not a question exactly. The statement of a man who has looked at a person and read the weather correctly. She handed him the letter without speaking. He read it. His expression didn't change much, but something in his jaw set the same way hers did when she was deciding something. He read it twice. Then he folded it and put it on the table. "How much do you have left?" he said. $212. And he's claiming $168. Yes. He sat down across the table from her without being invited, which he'd never done before. It didn't feel like a liberty. It felt like a man who has decided this is his problem too, and is not going to stand in the doorway to discuss it. "I can get a lawyer," he said. "Tom Haverford in Harlan. He's good. If this loan was undocumented, Cole has a weak case, and Haverford will find the weakness." "That costs money," Rose said. "I'll cover it." She looked at him. "Harlan." "A loan," he said. "Payable back when you can. With no interest. Those are the terms." He met her eyes. "Don't argue with me about this." She looked at the letter on the table. She looked at the window, at the Wind River Range doing what it always did. She had been alone for 6 weeks. She had been capable and straight-backed and had not cried in front of anyone, including herself on most days, and she was tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. "I don't know how to do this," she said quietly. "Accept help." "I can see that," he said. "You've been bad at it the whole time I've known you." She looked at him sharply. He was not smiling exactly, but the edges of it were there. "That wasn't a criticism," he said. "What was it?" "An observation," he said. "You take help from no one, and you do everything yourself, and you stand on porches while strangers carry out the furniture, and you don't flinch. That's admirable, Rose. It's also exhausting, and you look it." She said nothing for a long moment. "You have about 6 weeks left," he said. "Let me help for 6 weeks. If at the end of it you want to go to Laramie and the room at Eleanor's, I'll drive you to the stage myself." He paused. "But let me help." She pressed her hands flat on the table, looked at them. Work-roughened, capable, the hands of a woman who had managed a household and a ranch and a grief, and had done all of it without asking anyone for anything. "All right," she said. It was a small word for a large thing. He seemed to understand that, because he didn't make more of it than it was. He just nodded, picked up the letter, and went to town to find Tom Haverford. Preston Cole left Harlan County inside of 2 weeks. Tom Haverford wrote him one letter of 6 paragraphs, the last of which apparently contained language specific enough about the legal consequences of pursuing an undocumented claim against a widow's diminished estate that Cole folded his case and was on the eastbound stage before the week was out. Harlan reported this to Rose on a Tuesday, not a Thursday. She noticed the day again. She had started noticing things like that, the small departures from pattern that meant something, even when nothing was said about what they meant. "He's gone?" "He's gone," she exhaled, slowly, the way you exhale something you've been holding for 2 weeks. "What do I owe Tom Haverford?" "Nothing. He and Daniel went to school together. He considered it settled." She looked at him. "And what do I owe you?" "Nothing," he said. "Harlan." "Nothing," he said again, in the tone he used when something was decided and he didn't intend to reopen it. She had learned this tone quickly. She had also learned that arguing with it was largely decorative. He would listen, he would not move. She went to the window. The mountains were holding a fresh coat of snow on the upper peaks. Below that line, the aspens were bare. November was 2 weeks out. "I've been thinking," she said. He waited. He was very good at waiting. "About your offer," she said. "The cottage." "I remember the offer," he said. She turned from the window. He was watching her with the same steady attention he'd given her since the first Thursday in the dry goods store, not demanding anything, not performing patience, just genuinely present. "I wrote to Eleanor," she said. "I told her I wanted to stay." Something shifted in his expression. Not dramatic, just a settling, the way a house settles when the wind stops testing it. "She wrote back," Rose continued. "She said, 'Then stay, you foolish woman, and write to me often.'" A pause. "She also said she'd expected this." Had she? Apparently. Rose folded her arms against her chest, not in defense, just in the habitual self-containment of a woman who had held herself together for a long time. "I'm not sure what she expected exactly. I'm not sure what I expect either." "You don't have to know," he said. "It's a cottage. It's wages. It's staying in the place you know, instead of going somewhere you don't. The rest of it," he paused, choosing words with his usual care. "The rest of it can take whatever time it takes." She looked at him. 46 years old, salt and pepper at his temples, weathered in the way that outdoor men weather. Not hard, just marked by the years, the way good wood is marked by use. He had steady hands and a steady voice, and he drove to town on Thursdays for nails he sometimes didn't need. "You're a careful man," she said. "I've been called worse," he said. "I'm a careful woman." "I noticed," he said. "First Thursday." Something happened in her chest then. Not sudden, the slow arrival of something that had been approaching for weeks and had been waiting for the right moment to be acknowledged. "All right," she said, for the second time in a month, the same small word for an equally large thing. "The cottage." He nodded. He did not make more of it than it was. This, she thought, was probably the most important thing about him. She moved into the foreman's cottage on the 10th of November, 2 weeks before her time on the Callaway land expired. The cottage was small in the way honest things are small, not meager, just exactly the size of what it was. 2 rooms, as he'd said. Weather-tight, as he'd said. She spent the first day putting her things in it and finding, with some surprise, that they fit. Not just in the physical sense, in the way you know when a space receives you. There was a small iron stove that heated the main room efficiently. A window facing east for the morning light. She put her mother's quilt on the narrow bed, and her 3 books on the shelf above it, and her spare dress on the hook behind the door. She put Daniel's photograph on the small table by the window, where she could see it from the bed. She did not feel she was leaving him behind. She felt she was bringing him along in the only way that remained available, as memory, as love held quietly, as the part of a person that doesn't go when the body goes. She cooked the first supper at the main house that evening. Mrs. Dowd had left a month ago for Cheyenne, and the kitchen had that particular disorder of a man who can feed himself but cannot be said to manage a kitchen. Rose reorganized the pantry without comment, found what she needed, and made a proper supper. Harlan sat at the table and ate without fanfare, and said, when he was finished, "That's the best meal I've had in this house in 4 years." Mrs. Dowd was a fine woman, Rose said. She was, he agreed. She also thought salt was the enemy. Rose almost smiled. Almost. They sat with coffee afterward, which had become natural by about the 3rd Thursday, and had remained natural since. The kitchen was warm. Outside, the November wind was testing the windows without conviction. "I want to say something," Rose said. He looked at her. "I've been alone for 3 months," she said. "Not by choice, at first, and then by habit, and then because it was easier then." She stopped, started again. "I had forgotten what it felt like to have someone on the other side of a conversation who was actually listening." She looked at her coffee cup. "You listen, Harlan. You always have, since the first Thursday." He was quiet for a moment. "Ada used to say I was too quiet," he said. "Said I listened so much I forgot to speak." She wasn't wrong. A pause. "I suppose I got more use out of listening than out of talking." "You get considerable use out of both," Rose said. He looked at her. She held his gaze, which she'd gotten better at. The first Thursday she'd looked away each time, the way you look away from something that's a bit too bright. She didn't look away anymore. "Rose," he said. "I know," she said. "I know we're being careful. I know there's time. I'm not in a hurry." She set down her coffee cup. "I just wanted you to know that I see it, what you've done, what you're doing." She folded her hands on the table, the way she folded her hands when she was about to say something she'd decided on. "I'm not a woman who takes things for granted." "I know you're not," he said. "And I'm not going to Laramie. I know that too. I'm staying here." She met his eyes. "Because I want to, not because I have to. There's a difference, and I want it said plainly." He looked at her for a long moment. The fire moved in the stove, the wind pushed at the windows, and the windows held. "It's said," he said, and then, quietly, with the particular simplicity of a man who says the true things plainly when he finally says them, "I'm glad." The winter came. Wyoming winters are not interested in sentiment. They arrive when they arrive, and they stay as long as they stay, and they do not consult anyone's plans in the matter. This one came early, and settled in with the confidence of something that intends to be present for a while. Rose managed the house, and Harlan managed the land, and they met at the table 3 times a day, and in the evenings sometimes stayed long after the dishes were cleared, talking about the cattle and the fence lines, and what needed doing in the spring, and gradually about other things. His sons, he had 2, grown and working ranches of their own in Colorado, her family in Ohio, her mother still living, her father 10 years gone. How she'd come to Wyoming at 19 with Daniel, who had been full of plans and ambition, and had, for the most part, made the plans real. She talked about Daniel freely, without apology, and he listened freely, without discomfort. He talked about Ada the same way. They were both people who had loved and lost, and had come out the other side, not hardened but honest, and the honesty made the space between them something rare, a place where the full truth of each person's life was welcome. In December, he asked her something he'd been thinking about for a while. They were on the porch. It was a cold, clear evening, the kind Wyoming produces in December when it relents from the wind and gives you something crystalline and still instead. The stars were extremely visible. The mountains were black against a sky going from deep blue to purple at the horizon. "Do you miss it?" he said. The Callaway land. She considered it. I miss Daniel on the Callaway land, she said. Which is different? The land itself. She looked at the mountains. I can see the Wind River Range from this porch. It's the same mountains. He looked at her profile in the starlight. I want to ask you something, he said. And I want you to know there's no pressure in the asking. The cottage is yours regardless. That's not contingent on anything. She turned to look at him, waiting. I've been alone for 4 years, he said. Not unhappy exactly. I know how to be alone, but he turned his hat in his hands. She watched his hands on the hat and felt something move in her chest that had been moving slowly for months. There's a difference between alone and lonely, and I've been both, and I'd like to stop being the second one, if you'd consider it. She was quiet for a moment. The cold air was clean and still. Somewhere out in the pasture, cattle moved with the soft sound of large animals settling. Consider what, specifically, she said. Being my wife, he said, plainly, the way he said everything that mattered. When you're ready, there's no hurry. I said that before and I meant it. She looked at the mountains. She thought about a porch in August with strangers walking through her rooms. She thought about $212 and a letter from Laramie that said, not much, but ours. She thought about a man who drove to town on Thursdays for nails and who had read a lawyer's letter at her kitchen table and set it down and said, I'll cover it, without making her feel small for needing him to. She thought about Ada Briggs and Daniel Callaway, both of them gone, both of them loved, both of them carried forward in the daily lives of the people who had loved them. Not as ghosts, as foundations. Harlan, she said. Yes. I stopped being in a hurry, she said. About 3 weeks ago. He went still beside her. Then he turned to look at her, and she was looking back at him with the October eyes that had been looking at him, honestly, since the first Thursday in the dry goods store. Then yes, she said, when you're ready. He put his hand over hers on the porch rail. It was a large hand, work-roughened, warm despite the cold. She turned her hand over and held it. They stood like that for a while, looking at the mountains and the stars and the dark land that would be green again in April. That was hers now in the way that things become yours when someone who loves you says, yours, and means it. They were married on a Saturday in February in the Harlan church, on a day when the cold had relented slightly and the sky was the clear, rinsed blue that comes after a week of snow. Rose wore a dress the color of sage green because she was not a woman who needed to wear white, and because the sage green suited her and she knew it. Harlan stood at the altar in his good jacket with his hat in his hands and watched her walk toward him and understood with the weight of 46 years what it meant to be surprised by a good thing. His sons came from Colorado, both of them. They shook Rose's hand and looked at their father's face and seemed satisfied by what they saw there. Eleanor Callaway came from Laramie. She sat in the second pew and cried with the unashamed enthusiasm of a woman whose instincts had been vindicated and who had written, "Stay, you foolish woman," and been listened to. Martha Greer was there, naturally. She had opinions about the whole thing and voiced them to anyone in range, all of them favorable, which suggested she'd been expecting this outcome longer than either of the principals. After the ceremony, in the cold, bright afternoon, Harlan and Rose stood on the church steps, and Rose looked out at the Wind River Range, standing white and enormous against the February sky. The same mountains she'd looked at from the Callaway porch. The same mountains she'd looked at from the foreman's cottage window. The same mountains she'd look at from this porch for the rest of her life. Same mountains, Harlan said beside her. He'd followed her gaze. She looked at him. How did you know what I was thinking? I've been paying attention, he said. She took his arm. He covered her hand with his, the way he had on the porch in December, warm against the cold. The thing about a second life is that it doesn't ask you to forget the first one. It asks you to carry the first one forward into something new and to trust that what you carry doesn't crush the new thing, but grounds it. Rose Calloway had loved well and lost, and had stood on a porch in a gray dress while strangers carried out the furniture and had not looked away. She was still not looking away. She was looking at a Wyoming February with the eyes of a woman who has reckoned with what's hard and has come through it not smaller, but more sure of what she's worth and what she wants. And what she wanted was the arm under her hand and the mountains above the church and the long, honest life ahead. It was, by every measure she knew how to apply, enough. Before I go tonight, I want to ask you something. If you had been Rose Calloway, 3 months into grief, $200 to your name, a room in Laramie waiting, and a man offering a cottage and company, and no promises beyond that, what would you have done? Would you have stayed, or would you have gone? I think about this question. I think the answer tells you something true about yourself. Leave your answer in the comments. I read every one. If this story gave you something warm to carry into your evening, please like and subscribe. These frontier romances exist because of you, and I'm grateful for every one of you who rides along. Wherever you are in the world tonight, may God bless you. Until next time, keep riding.